Hello. I want to just start by saying thank you to Martin for inviting me to speak. I have been in friendship with Martin for 15 years now, and I have spoken at lots of events. So some of you will have seen me before, but I just want to announce this is my first ever conference. Woo! So it only takes 15 years. Okay, so just to quickly go through some of Martin's comments. So yes, I'm the founder of Little Man Project. We specialise in developing content for charities. So anything that you've got your whole library of amazing content on the LMS, but if there's bespoke stuff you need specific to your organisation, that's where we fit in. That's the kind of plug-in. Also the co-author, Jen gives a wave, my co-author, of a programme called E-Learning Unlocked. I'm going to give you a little bit of information about that at the end, so we won't go into too much about that. I am also the author, because apparently to get on this stage you also have to have written a book, so I've written this one. It's very small, it's not Coke and Page, you don't need a discount because it's free, but it still makes me an author. So I have written a little book of induction, first one to do second edition. Yeah, I know, it's not Coke and Page, but second edition. And if you fill out your feedback, then you will get a copy of that. Last thing I wanted to say is a little bit about me. I can stand on this stage and I can talk to you, but if you speak to me out there, I'll probably be quite shy. So it always seems a bit odd to people that I'm an introvert who doesn't mind standing on the stage, but that's the way that my world rolls. And if you talk to me for too long, I will talk about Denmark. It's an intense interest. Sorry. Okay, so in this session I want to talk about impact, because more than ever before we have to be proving our impact. We know where we are economically, we know that we've got massive change happening, and so this whole session is going to be around how you can demonstrate the value that you're adding to the organisation and why that's so important. So I am not saying that shouting about your value is more important than giving value, but if you don't do it and you only add value in the shadows, then who knows that you did it? Who knows that you need the budget? Who knows the impact that you're having? So this is what my whole session is around, that, just proving that impact. I don't want to go too much into this because we all know where we are, but things are bad. And we also know that when things get bad, L&D quite often is the first one to get the choppy chops. So this session is really focused on how can you make sure that that doesn't happen to you. So you'll notice here that I haven't bolded out the word essential. It's not are you essential, it's are you seen to be essential? Are you seen to be adding value to the organisation? You probably are, but are you being recognised for that? Are you seen in that role? Now, I will do a little bit here about this concept of order taker. You've probably heard it before. If you've read any of the books on the table, then you know this is a concept that people talk a lot about, and I am not an expert in it. But it really, fundamentally, before I get into my model, it's really about this idea of moving from being an order taker. Can we have some training? Can we have this module? How's the LMS doing? What's the completion rates on X? Moving to this idea of being more consultative, a detective. And it's about going into the business, into the organisation, and making sure that you understand the problems that people are experiencing so that you're being proactive in solving those problems, but also engaging with the right stakeholders in that solution. If you are interested in this more, then these are 3 books I would recommend. We haven't got any of these to give away. Sad times. I know. Yes, I would recommend all of these. I think probably particularly this one, if you're going to have to pick one. If budgets are completely blown and you have no money even for a Christmas present list of books, this podcast here, now Mind Tools I would hugely recommend for anyone within L&D in terms of personal development. The Mind Tools podcast is amazing. It's an old episode, hence it's their old brand. But it's a really interesting one because Keith is talking about his own experiences, having written and published the book, moving to a new organisation and basically having to apply his own model in the new organisation. And so it's particularly interesting because we can find it really difficult to make that shift from, we're so busy dealing with the questions, to make that shift, to set that time aside and to make that shift into being that more consultative role, it can be really difficult. And so I love this podcast because he talks about how he actually had to take his own book and actually apply it himself in practice and what he learned through that. I think the other thing that people often say to me is, I just don't have the power. Like I don't have the seat at the table. We talk a lot about that. And I just think, this quote from Alice Walker, who wrote The Colour Purple, is really powerful. We're giving it up if we don't believe we have it. So let's believe we have it, and then we can see how we get on at that point. By thinking you don't have it, then you've already given up. But if you just act as if you have the power and the influence, then maybe you'll start to gain it as well, and I'm going to hopefully give you some tips on how to do that. So, imagine that you have made that amazing shift, or you're already there, and you are now your detective, you're consulting, you're finding out what issues the organisation's having, where those issues are, what the issues are, and then you have decided that you have an issue that you believe that learning can solve, that some sort of learning intervention within your remit can solve it. And so now what do you do? So this is the model that I want to talk you through. We have one of these on your table, and you're welcome to take them. You'll also get one in the digital goodie bag because you can reuse it. And so we'll kind of be going through this, and hopefully this is something that then you can then take my model forward in terms of reusing in the future. So we often talk about starting with the problem, and then going to the solution. And so now I've added in this idea that we also need to build in, from the very beginning, our idea of how we're proving our impact. So our flow would be, where are we now? Where do we want to be, and how we'll get there? So that's like what's happening in here between our problem and our solution. And then how are we going to then prove that to the organisation? How are we going to talk about the results? So we'll start with identifying the problem, because fundamentally you only know, if you don't understand your problem, then you can't solve your problem. Regularly, we'll have clients come to us and say, we need a piece of e-learning on X. I'm sure you get the same thing. We need training on Y. Until you understand what that problem is, you cannot solve it. You can tick a box by creating said thing, by sending them on a training course. But if the training course doesn't solve the problem, and I mean actually solve the problem in terms of the issues that you're having, it just ticks a box. So if you don't understand it, the whole thing is going to be flawed. And so that's, for us, that's the first question I'm going to ask. And I'm pretty sure my clients get seriously bored with this question. But I really want to dig down and down and down. What is the problem? What are we solving? Because a GDPR course looks like one way, but if the issue is that people are giving out private information in particular, sending out in emails, or whatever that problem is, you won't solve that unless you understand. If you just give them a GDPR course, you won't solve it. Whereas if you know what your problem is, then you can focus your solution around the problem and look to solve it. Now, I can't claim this, but I love it. It's Andrew Jacobs has got an article on it. I will make sure that there's a link to it in the digital goodie bag, but I just think this is a really, really insightful piece. How permanent does your solution need to be? It's a slight tangent here, but I'm going to give it because I think it's really useful. Is it a hat, i.e., can I take it off, change it, put it back on again, move it about? Is it, not very permanent? It's just going to be a little bit of a thing that, we need to do. So, for instance, new policies coming in, but once it's in, it will be embedded, so therefore no longer needed. So it's just a hat. I just need to get that thing done, and then we can move on. Is it a haircut, which is that middle ground of it needs to be a bit longer, but at some point we're going to grow out of it because we don't need it anymore? Or is it a tattoo? Is it a tattoo? Is it permanent? Does it need to stay around? Yeah, it might get a bit, old and grey, but it's something that needs to be around for a long time. And once you start to think about your solutions in this way, that's a great way to then know where are you putting your investment. Because you need to be investing really in the tattoos and just coming up with quick wins for the hats. So my next point really is about, in terms of thinking about impact, if you're going to prove your impact, then you need to start engaging your stakeholders as early as possible. And that's through this consultative process of making sure that you understand what their needs are, but also engaging them in the solution, because they will then start to become advocates for you going forward. So in terms of promoting the value that you've brought to them, because you've had that consultation with them, you've understood, and now you've solved their problem, and suddenly L&D becomes this really kind of powerful, okay, yeah, this is working for us. Finance is not a person, but it does really matter. So I put him in as a person, but he's got a pound sign on his chest. Because if you can prove that you're also having financial benefit in some form or way, then that's also going to be really powerful. So the next thing to do, once you've talked to people, and I would always put people first, the next thing to do is to start to think about your data. So obviously you understand the difference between these two, but I just want to give you some ideas of where you might find that data, where you might be looking, and also, so you've got your two sides. You've got your kind of descriptive experience stuff, and then your numbers, your measurement. You'll notice that I haven't got any completion rates on that one. So in our scenario, we're going to do gift aid. I love charity shops, one of my intention interests, so gift aid is a particularly interesting topic to me. Yeah, I actually had to school my accountant on gift aid. They tried to explain to me how I should be reporting my gift aid, and I explained to them that's not how gift aid works. And they actually thanked me. I don't think they meant it. In our situation, we have identified that we do not believe, as an organisation, we are maximising gift aid. Okay? And so as we run through my model, we're going to look at how we might do that. Now, the key thing about having identified a problem is it also helps you then raise the case. So I've talked about how you've engaged with your stakeholders, so you've started to create advocates. So it's going to be really about who's going to support me in this, who's with me, who wants to help, who wants to solve this problem collaboratively with me, and how do I get the budget and resources. I put budget resources. You're probably going to be on this side. You're probably not going to get any budget, but at least you might get some resources, which will help. Okay, so then we start to think about, we know our problem, what's our solution going to look like? Now, this is a graphic designer's idea of a joke up here at the top, the gap. He didn't ask me to point that out, but I'm going to do that anyway for him. Now, we've had our session with Andy and we've looked at skills, but skills are only just one part of what your problem might be. So in terms of, sort of looking at all of these and thinking about what, the difference between them might be, we often have people who know what they should do, but aren't motivated to do it. That's not a skills problem, that's a motivation problem. We might have people who know what to do but don't have the time. That's not even a L&D problem, that's an organisational problem. So you've identified that issue, but you're going to have to move that over to someone else because that isn't something you can solve particularly. So you've got a whole kind of raft of things that it might be. And so I've included that list on that form. And the one that I added just today, in fact, it turns around environment. I had a really interesting conversation with a client this week about some call handling issues they were having. And they reckon they had a statistic of about 80% of their calls are not being directed correctly. So as we had my why conversation that they thoroughly enjoyed, I started to dig down into the, okay, so what do you think is happening? And actually what turned out, and I could see it dawn on his face as we had this conversation, the issue was that they were not rewarded for, they were rewarded for speed, not accuracy. And it don't really, if I produce a piece of e-learning that teaches them about accuracy, but the reward is still based, or the stick is still based on speed, then we're not going to solve the problem. So that's an environmental issue, a systems issue that learning's not going to solve. So by looking at all of your identified problem and thinking about, okay, where is the problem in here? What is the thing that's happening? Then you can start to say, not only find your solution, but even find out if the solution is in your remit of responsibility. Some of you, does anyone know action map? Look, I've seen the audio wave. Okay, so I love this. I've done a little sticky plaster because I think it works for everything. Again, I'll put the link to this in the digital goodie bag, but this is not me, this is Kathy Moore, and we have this up on a poster in our office, and we had a client come in and they thought it was a joke. They thought it was literally a joke. But we had this because they were like, you're an e-learning development company, why would you not want people to make e-learning? And I said, because I want to solve real problems, not just create stuff that's for the sake of creating stuff. So really the idea of this map is that you start with what's your goal, and then you go through, but what you're doing is you're working out, if it's an environmental thing, then the solution is not going to be training in any shape or form. So really useful resource for you to use in terms of asking yourself questions as you go through to identify, okay, what could be the solution and where does the solution look? And those of you who are fans of Kathy Moore, you will recognise this. And again, this is something that we use in terms of content development, but I think it works really well in terms of any L&D problem. So I have mentioned probably about 30 times now having your goal, your measurable goal, based on what your problem is. And then if you move out, then in terms of what your solution might be, you should be looking at what behaviours do people need to practice to meet that goal. So if it's a safeguarding, I know we like safeguarding, if it's safeguarding and your goal is to increase reporting, then your behaviours around that might be identification, understanding how to report, anything that practically moves you from, towards your goal is where you're going to be focused. And then my favourite part of all is that the only thing you then provide in your solution is things that allow them to practice the goal, allow them to practice the behaviour that then meets your measurable goal. And it means that you get to get your subject expert and say, no, I'm not putting that in. That doesn't help with any of my behaviour change. No, we're not putting that in. Don't tell me about the law, and that doesn't change behaviour. So this is the focus. So this is great. So those two resources are linked to because they are really useful in all L&D practice. So using the research that you've got and you've talked to you found out what people said and you've looked at the data. So this is focused on our gift aid situation. We can now go away and start to think about how we're going to solve that problem. One other thing that I want to mention is in terms of reflecting on what your solution might look like, is this idea of actually, does it meet our organisational goals? So that's that kind of step back. Our resources are limited. Everyone's hot now. I just realised we went from being freezing cold to now we're all really hot. So does it meet your organisational goals? Because again, when it comes to value, it doesn't matter that if you've identified an issue, but if it doesn't meet your organisational goals, then you might be saying, okay, well, is this actually where we should be investing our valuable time in terms of solutions? So it's not to say that you shouldn't, but it's like, does it work? Kind of looking at all of these things, what's our audience? Is it going to be sustainable, the solution that we've come up with? This is your kind of yardstick to, okay, can we afford it? Can we keep running it after? Does it meet our goals as an organisation? So I've come up with a solution. I believe that to solve this problem, we've got a multi-pronged attack. It's not going to be one piece of e-learning. And I've highlighted in yellow, those are the only things that I think are within my realm of responsibility as the L&D manager in our fictional situation. Those top two are outside of my realm. but they are part of my whole solution. And because I've engaged with the right people, I can then start to make sure that we fix all, that we implement all of those solutions. And as I keep saying, if you don't understand, and you don't solve the problem, it's going to be bad for you. It's also bad for your organisation, because just by spending some money or some resources on a solution, going back to our GDPR, we just provide that, then we've invested money, we've wasted money, and that looks bad on you because you no longer solve the problem. It's also just bad for the organisation. So once we have all this data, it's going to be inform our design. We'll know who it's for, what it will be, how we're going to deliver it, and what it's going to look like. And now we're getting on to impact. So this is our final. Completion rates aren't going to do it. It's interesting, we had on the WhatsApp group this week a big discussion. Are you involved in that? Big discussion about completion rates and why we have to have them and why they're not ideal, but in terms of organisational compliance, we have to know about them. But in terms of this problem solving, it doesn't prove anything. It just proves that people sat in front of it and got to the end of it. That doesn't help you in terms of your value. So that's why. Now, how do we work out whether or not we how do we prove it? Then we have to go back to our goal. And if we have a measurable goal, then we know where we are now and where we want to be. Whether or not we've reached it. So we then contrast those figures. So if it's around reporting, that's an easy one because you know where you are in terms of the statistics. If you want to increase reporting on safeguarding, you can tell statistically whether that's happened, if that was your focus. Now, obviously, I've got a fictional situation, so we actually knocked it out of the park because we already got to 24% just because I was allowed to make that up. So the point is that we worked with the organisation to understand the problem. We then identified a multi-pronged attack in terms of what our solution might be, and now we've got something to shout about, and now we get to shout. So on this side, I've got some examples of what your big shouty things might be. So case studies, including quotes. You might have an impact dashboard. You might, be allowed to speak at events within the organisation. When I used to run a training company, I used to create an annual report of our impact, and I used to share that with the rest of the organisation. I was the only person that did it. Everybody thought it was nuts because it was just more work. But that's when I got to start to promote what we were doing, raise the profile, raise the budget, and then I left. But anyway. But there's all this other stuff. So don't underestimate. You've got this side, which is your big shouty stuff, but there's all the secret squirrel stuff you can do. So don't be a bore, but mention the impact you've had in your meetings. Oh, it's really interesting because actually, we've just had some feedback on our recent L&D launch, and blah blah blah. Just drop it in. That's when you'll make sure, because not everyone's going to be reading this. But if you start to just drop it into conversation, you'll start to get people to sort of understand what you're doing. Obviously, create advocates, because remember, we engaged our stakeholders at the very beginning, so now they're already become our friends. And then we'll start to get that, in terms of them advocating for us and the solutions we can do. I also like things like celebrate other people, lead by example, start to promote other people's work, and hopefully then they'll start to reciprocate. In terms of performance discussions, make sure that you're having those when you're talking about, make sure you've got your evidence when you're having your one-to-ones. To be able to kind of present that. So I talked at the beginning about the power, but obviously if you have success, I did because I made it up, but if you have success, then it's going to be the route to your influence. Now you might be nervous to start with. You might think, I don't know if I'm going to have success. access because we've never managed it in this way before. So maybe you don't tell everybody. Maybe you just start to have your, you start to do it and you start to be able to see whether or not it's happening. Maybe you don't just go in hardcore, shout, yeah, I'm going to get this 20% up. Yeah, that's great. Maybe you don't do that, but maybe you do it internally and then you start to learn. And only when you learn and make mistakes can you get better. We all know that. We tell individuals within the organisation all the time. So let's lead by example and have a go and then learn and then develop and improve. Now, when you're reporting about this, it's really important that you don't talk L&D language, talk their language. Make your reports really interesting and visual, tell stories, talk about what's, if in our gift aid situation, we might, use quotes from managers, we might tell stories. Do that rather than, we use this model and then that worked. And, I'm not saying don't use good evaluation models, but don't talk about them because only this room cares about them. They don't care about them, so talk in their language, make it interesting and visual for them. And just because of the lay of the land, you probably can't see this one. But AI is going to be really, really, really helpful. So when I was writing the last unit for eLearning Unlocked, which is on evaluation, I gave ChatGPT a scenario with some data, and I said, okay, write me some great stories around this. And that output then went into the book, and I told everybody, obviously. But it can be really great ways to come up with a really creative way of producing those stories if that's something that's not your kind of your bag. Now, I focus very much about the internal side of promoting it within the organisation, but do it externally as well. It will help raise your confidence. And if you do any of these, you get an award. So talk about your successes on LinkedIn. Other people within your own organisation will see it, but so will others. Give a presentation at a CLC members meeting. Amber's always asked for great case studies. So do that. You'll get feedback. You can share what you've done. People will learn from you, but you'll also get feedback from others on what they're doing in a similar way. Enter awards. There's lots of commercial awards out there. Martin and I are on a quest to make sure that charities, you saw that no charity won again this year at Learning Technologies. But we'll help you in any way we can. So think about it, do it. And then write case studies, but also tell your account managers, because that's the secret squirrel way to make sure that CLC know what you're doing, and then they can also connect you with other people who might be doing similar things. And a big shout out to doing the CL index, because again, when it comes to being able to talk about what you're doing within the organisation and benchmark and learn and see whether or not you've developed, that's a great opportunity to do that and a great thing to shout about within the organisation. We've done this, and in terms of the benchmark, we are here, and that's very, that's maybe 2% more than anyone else within our sector. Whatever, that's what you should be focusing on in terms of doing that and then talking about the results. And if everything goes wrong, well, I should whisper it, and it doesn't work within your own organisation, if you've got the data and the facts and the solutions for what you did, and you've talked about it on LinkedIn, your next job is going to be much easier. Hopefully you don't get there. But it will help in terms of your confidence in terms of what you're doing, because unless you know the data of success, then how do you know what everything you do every day, whether or not it's working and having the impact? So data will help you to learn that. So you've got to communicate. You've got to talk about what happened, what was the impact, and then you've got to think about how am I going to present this. And so the sheet here really is very much around getting you to reflect on all of these different aspects so that you can see, and plan your attack. So when we bring it all together, you can see that, it's about identifying, designing, and then reporting, talking about it. And it's about your problem moving to your solution, which is then proving your impact. Now, I came up with this for this session, but I also have the pleasure of going to several conferences this year. Thanks, Martin. And I do a write-up of each of the sessions that I attend. And I have published that with what I think are key takeaways for charities. That's all been published on the CLC website. Again, we'll put a link in. So if you want to know what people were talking about at World of Learning, that's all in on their website. And this is Laura. We had Laura's book. We don't. So this is Laura, and this is Laura talking about pretty much the same kind of concept that I am talking about now. But in her model, the TRI is tuning in, and that's about discovery. That's about making sure you understand the business. I really like the idea of tuning in, because you're kind of listening, engaging, then responding, and then improving. So hers is this kind of cyclical process of making sure that you understand, what's needed. This is another model from her, which I think she may have presented at a members meeting, around this idea of, which way you mix your, the learning value versus the organizational value, the different ways that you might look at that. And then there's another model. So I'm just showing you these to prove that loads of people are talking about it. This is my model. But this is really on the agenda in terms of the discussions within the commercial sector as well. Any questions? Any challenges? Anyone think they're doing this well? Sit down. Anyone think they're doing this well? You kind of, come on. Okay.
The starting point obviously is in identifying the solution.
Yeah.
The challenges are not work. Almost like we don't necessarily have that starting data. The person coming with the issue perhaps will miss something.
Yep.
You mentioned you need to fit with what causes. So the right conversation we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you need
Yeah.
How can we work with stakeholders?
Yeah. And this happens a lot for us. So what do I recommend? I definitely do the 4-year-old child why thing over and over and over again. Quite a lot of the time the answer is it's because it's compliance. And I say, but why do we have compliance is based on this topic? So then it's like, okay, so we do that because we don't want to do this. Okay, so that's a why, and is that our why? So I just keep going why. The other thing I would think about is, can we collect data even though we don't have it already? So if you don't have the data, then maybe you can start collecting it. So particularly if you're doing like pulse surveys or whatever, can you get some questions in that can then start you to collect that data, so that then you can do your comparison at the end based on that. I also do observations. I think that's another one that you can, just sort of, okay, talk me through it. Let me just have a look at what you're doing, like what. So then you can start to create data yourself based on your observations of what you're seeing. And then maybe that, it all takes time, but it's so powerful, particularly when you think about the kind of, where your gap is and what the issue is. That's when you can really bring that, like, what is the problem? So in the gift aid one, is it confidence? Is it that speed is really important to that charity shop because it's really busy, and so therefore they don't ask that question? Is it because, I can go on for hours, is it because people are just quickly coming in and dumping stuff, and therefore they don't get the chance to ask them before they've left? So not all of those things are going to need a training solution. Any other questions? Okay, quickly before Martin throws me off the stage. Here's my contact details. Link up with me on LinkedIn. We talk a lot about this. I noticed that I've got two heads and one body. Very quickly about e-learning unlocked. I just want to. Has anyone heard of e-learning unlocked? Ooh, so it's okay. I really have a minute. Who's done e-learning unlocked? Thank you. Okay, so e-learning unlocked is a 12-month program that we run at Little Man Project. It's based entirely on our expertise in this area of doing it and doing it in your sector. It's broken down into 7 units. So some units are 2 months, some are 1, and it takes you from the very beginnings of instructional design right through all of the different processes that we go through, right through to evaluation. Clearly, we talk about evaluation at the beginning because we know that's really important, but we've just scheduled it to be at the end of the process. But we go through all of the things. Now, what we don't do is teach you how to use a particular development tool. So we're not teaching you on Storyline. We will talk about Storyline if you want to, and we will have separate sessions on it if there's people that are interested, but it's not part of this program so that we can make sure that we're maximizing who's there, because if you're not using Storyline, that bit's pointless to you. In terms of the results that we've had, I had to get ChatGPT to test these results because I was so shocked by how well it had gone. But the program that completed in 2024, which is obviously we're just finishing 25, so we don't have their data, but we had a 77% improvement on people who felt prepared to lead or contribute to an e-learning project, and an 82% confidence rise in terms of e-learning in general. So it's a really big, powerful impact. It's a lot of work, but it's absolutely worth it, and people are really finding that they're getting great results. There is a discount. If you want more information, it's on the back, the flip side of this here. Or Jen and I are here, you can talk to us. But there is a special discount code for you guys. And we also do a group discount. And now I'm really done, and you can kick me off the stage.